In 1993, the Got Milk campaign is taught in every business school in America as a marketing miracle. The sales numbers it actually left behind tell you why that lesson is a lie. But to understand the lie, you have to understand the desperation that made anyone believe it in the first place. In 1993, the California dairy industry was bleeding out. Per capita milk consumption in the state had collapsed from 30 gallons a year in 1980 to just over 24, according to USDA data. Nationally, the picture was older and uglier. Americans had been drinking less milk every single year for a decade and a half, and the slope of the decline wasn't softening. It was getting steeper. The people whose livelihoods depended on milk, the processors, the bottlers, the farmers, the cooperatives, were watching a multi-billion-dollar industry slip away one carton at a time. For most of those 15 years, the industry had fought back the way every American food category fights back, with health messaging. Milk, it does a body good, the McCann-Erickson campaign that had run since 1984, told Americans that milk built strong bones, healthy teeth, and beautiful children. Calcium, protein, vitamin D. Every billboard, every commercial, every classroom poster delivered the same nutritional sales pitch. And it didn't work. By 1992, the average American was drinking under 0.8 cups of milk a day, down from about a cup and a half in the 1970s. The good-for-you argument was losing badly, to a wall of brightly coloured soda cans, refrigerated juice cartons, sports drinks, and a brand new beverage category the industry had only recently invented, bottled water. So the California Department of Food and Agriculture did something that, in hindsight, sounds almost desperate. In February of 1993, the state created an entirely new organization. They called it the California Milk Processor Board, and they gave it exactly one job: save the industry, reverse the trend, get Californians drinking milk again. The budget was $23 million a year, funded by a 3-cent surcharge on every gallon of milk processed in the state of California. Every gallon sold paid a small tax to fund the rescue. For context, in 1992, Coca-Cola had spent $100 million advertising a single product, Coca-Cola Classic. Pepsi was spending similar money. Snapple was rising. Bottled water brands were ramping up. The entire combined ad budget for California's dairy industry added up to less than 1/4 of what Coke was spending to defend one brand. The Milk Processor Board was walking into a beverage war with roughly a quarter of a slingshot. And then, in June of 1993, they hired the man who would either save them or finish them. His name was Jeff Manning. And the first thing he did was throw out the entire playbook the dairy industry had been running for 40 years. Jeff Manning had spent most of his career in fast-moving consumer goods. He understood one thing about packaged product advertising that the dairy industry had been forgetting for 40 years. You don't, as a rule, get people to start consuming a product they aren't already consuming. The math doesn't work. The conversion costs are astronomical. The brain real estate is too expensive. What you do, if you actually want to move the needle on volume, is find the people who already buy your product and convince them to buy more of it. So Manning started with research, and the research told him something interesting. Even after 15 years of decline, 70% of Californians still reported drinking milk on a regular basis. The dairy industry's customer base hadn't collapsed. What had collapsed was the frequency. People weren't quitting milk, they were just forgetting about it. That single data point reframed the entire problem. The dairy industry didn't have an acquisition problem, it had a usage problem. And usage problems in marketing are a completely different animal. They don't need health claims, they don't need nutritional education, they need triggers, moments, reminders that pull the product back to the front of your mind in the specific situations where you would actually reach for it. In July of 1993, Manning hired a San Francisco advertising agency called Goodbye, Silverstein and Partners. It was a small but rising creative shop known for sharp, intelligent work for clients like Anheuser-Busch and Royal Caribbean. The agency was led by a creative director named Jeff Goodbye, and Goodbye had an idea that, on paper, sounded like marketing suicide. Every milk ad in American history had sold the same emotion: optimism, strong children, healthy adults, glowing bones. The campaign Goodbye pitched to the milk processor board sold the exact opposite emotion: panic. His insight was disarmingly simple, built on what behavioral economists call loss aversion. The only time, he said, that consumers actually wanted milk, really urgently, badly wanted it, was the moment they ran out, the moment the cereal bowl was filled, the moment the cookie was raised, the moment the peanut butter sandwich got stuck to the roof of your mouth. That, Goodbye argued, was when milk mattered. So that's the moment we should advertise. John Steele, the agency's strategist, had discovered this insight during focus groups where participants were deprived of milk for a week. The reaction was visceral. He gave his creative team a single, stylistic guideline. Watch Steven Spielberg's 1971 thriller, Duel, the one about a man hunted across the desert by a faceless truck, and use it as a tonal reference. Make ads that felt like that, suspenseful, almost menacing. Small domestic horror stories built around the absence of a white drink. Then Goodbye took a notepad, wrote down 2 words, "got milk," and added a question mark. That was the entire idea. A 2-word panic attack aimed at people who already had milk in their refrigerators. The milk processor board approved it. They didn't have many other options. And in October of 1993, they put the first ad of the new campaign on television. They didn't yet know what they had just unleashed. The first ad aired on October 29, 1993. It was 60 seconds long, shot on grainy film, and directed by a young commercials director named Michael Bay. Yes, that Michael Bay. He would, a few years later, leave advertising to make Bad Boys, Armageddon, and Transformers. But in October of 1993, his entire career came down to making 60 seconds of dairy advertising land. The setup was simple. A history obsessive, played by a then unknown actor named Sean Whalen, sits in his apartment surrounded by Revolutionary War memorabilia. The radio is on. The host announces a $10,000 trivia question. Who shot Alexander Hamilton in the famous duel? The man knows the answer. He has been waiting his entire life to know an answer this well. He picks up the phone, gets through on the first try, and tries to say Aaron Burr. But he has just taken a huge bite of a peanut butter sandwich, and he is catastrophically out of milk. What comes out of his mouth is a wet, mangled anon-blurg. He loses the money. The screen cuts to black. 2 words appear in white letters. Got milk? It was a sensation, almost instantly. The agency had braced for the usual long climb a good campaign requires, the months it takes for an ad to seep into the cultural water. They got something different. Within weeks, the spot was being talked about in newspaper columns, late-night monologues, and offices that had nothing to do with milk. The ad won a Clio. USA Today would later name it one of the greatest commercials of all time. More importantly, it worked. At least, it appeared to. The numbers from the first 12 months were the kind of numbers that turn marketing executives into legends. The percentage of Californians who reported drinking milk several times a week jumped from 72% to 78%. Household consumption rose every month after the first 2. Sales volume swung from a 1.67% decline in the year before launch to a 1.07% increase in the year after, a roughly $31 million swing in recovered revenue. By 1994, California processors were selling 755 million gallons of milk, up from 740 million. And the most damning data point of all, for everyone else, nationwide milk consumption was still falling. In California, it had stopped. The Milk Processor Board's own analysts put a number on the rescue. The campaign, they claimed, had prevented an estimated $255 million in annual losses the industry would otherwise have suffered. A $23 million advertising bet had, by their math, generated roughly an 11-to-1 return in its first year. Within 2 years, the slogan had 90% awareness in California. Within 5 years, it had been licensed to the national dairy industry under a new organization called MilkPEP, where it merged with another agency's idea, the now iconic Milk Moustache, and went onto magazine covers, school posters, and the upper lip of every celebrity in America. Britney Spears, the Olsen twins, David Beckham. 300 celebrities eventually. The campaign became one of the most awarded advertising efforts in human history. Years later, Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton musical would even reference the Aaron Burr commercial, cementing its place in American pop culture. This is the part of the story everyone remembers. The next part is the part no one talks about. For about 3 years, the California Milk Processor Board could point to its data and say, with reasonable confidence, that the decline had stopped. But the deeper you look at the numbers and the longer the time horizon you draw, the more uncomfortable the picture becomes. Start with the long view. In 1970, the average American was drinking 0.96 cups of milk a day. By 1993, when the campaign launched, that number had fallen to about 0.78. By 2011, nearly 2 decades into the Got Milk era, with 300 celebrity ads, every major advertising award, 90% brand recognition, and a national budget that ballooned past $100 million a year at its peak, the average American was drinking 0.59 cups of milk a day. By the time the campaign was retired in 2014, that figure had slipped further to about 0.49. In other words, one of the most famous advertising campaigns in modern American history sat on top of one of the steepest declines in beverage consumption in modern American history. And the slide never stopped. Not for one of the 21 years the campaign was on the air. Now look more carefully at the celebrated California numbers, the ones that built the legend. Yes, in 1994, the year after launch, milk sales in California rose. They rose by about 2%. They rose again, modestly, for a couple more years. And then they began to slip. By the late 90s, California was back in decline along with the rest of the country, just at a slightly gentler angle. The campaign didn't reverse the trend. It briefly flattened it, and then it lost the same fight the industry had been losing since the 1970s, only with better cinematography. This is the central tension in every honest assessment of Got Milk. Awareness was extraordinary. Consumption was not. By the early 2000s, marketing researchers were openly using the campaign as a case study in a phenomenon now called the awareness gap. The gap between people knowing about your product, talking about your product, parodying your product on Saturday Night Live, and the much smaller number of people actually buying more of it. By every measure of cultural footprint, Got Milk was a once-in-a-generation success. By the measure that mattered most to the dairy farmers whose 3-cent surcharge had funded the entire thing, it was a beautifully decorated holding action. What about that headline figure, the $255 million in annual losses the campaign allegedly prevented? That number deserves a closer look. It came from the Milk Processor Board's own internal projections, an extrapolation of what the previous decline curve would have produced if it had continued unchanged, minus what actually happened. It was a counterfactual. The dairy industry was claiming credit for a hypothetical disaster that never arrived. There were no independent econometric studies. No outside auditor confirmed the figure. The $255 million was a number the rescue organization produced about itself, and the press repeated it for 30 years. In 2014, MilkPEP, the national licensee of Got Milk, quietly killed the campaign and replaced it with a new tagline called Milk Life. The mustache disappeared. The celebrities went home. The license in California remained, but the cultural moment was over. Milk consumption didn't bounce. The almond and oat milk shelves got longer. And every year since, the volume of cow's milk consumed per American has continued, with statistical reliability, to fall. The patient survived the surgery. The patient did not ultimately survive the disease. So back to the question the business schools never quite answer honestly. Did a $23 million ad gamble save a dying agricultural industry? The answer is, it depends on what you think the money was buying. If the Milk Processor Board was paying for a campaign that would freeze the long decline of dairy consumption? No. The dairy industry didn't get what it paid for. By every long-term metric, the disease ran its course. The slope flattened for a few quarters. The press wrote some glowing case studies, and then the same demographic, dietary, and cultural forces that had been killing milk since the 1970s went right back to work. But if the Milk Processor Board was paying for cultural permanence, for the right to be remembered, parodied, taught, and quoted long after the milk truck stopped showing up at the back door, then $23 million a year may be one of the highest returns on advertising spend in American business history. Almost no campaign of comparable size has been remembered for half as long. Got Milk became language. Got Milk became a meme before there were memes. Got Milk outlived its product. And this is the lesson the business schools keep getting wrong. They teach Got Milk as a story about marketing that worked. It's actually a story about something stranger and more useful. Marketing that achieved enormous cultural power and almost no commercial leverage at the same time. Two outcomes that, in the standard textbook, are supposed to be the same outcome. They are not. $23 million bought one of the most famous advertising campaigns in American history. It didn't buy a healthier dairy industry. It bought a beautiful goodbye. And in the boardrooms of every brand that has ever poured a budget into chasing awareness instead of consumption, that distinction is the bill that has been quietly coming due ever since.